5th, 1979. Etan Patz. Etan's mother let the 6-year-old walk 2 blocks to catch the school bus on his own. But Etan vanished in those 2 blocks, and an intense search began. Things became etched in parents' minds after Etan. Judge declared Etan dead, as his parents had requested.
We never had a body.
It represents to the family very incomplete justice.
There is no justice for Etan.
We are breaking into the story we were scheduled to bring you tonight in the search for a little lost 6-year-old boy, Etan Patz. Last seen on the day that he begged his mom to let him just walk 2 blocks to the bus stop alone. The very first day. He was never seen again. Right now, digging underneath the streets for remains of Etan Patz. We are taking you live. Susan Candiotti, CNN correspondent, joining us on the scene. There you're seeing aerial footage of where Susan is standing. The search for 6-year-old Etan Patz ongoing right now. Susan, can you hear me?
Nancy, right now there's a ton of police activity out here. Helicopter has been flying overhead, but right now all the action is at this particular location. It is the red brick building that you see over my shoulder, and that is where the FBI, with an assist from the NYPD, is currently doing excavation work. I mean, they are digging down into the basement, into the flooring. This could be original. Who knows how old the construction is, but certainly at least 33 years old. Digging there to see what they can find. They're looking into the walls and into the basement. What are they looking for? Specifically, they are looking for, they said, possibly finding the human remains of little Etan Patz, who is 6 years old at the time he disappeared. They're looking for human remains. They're looking for clothing, any personal effects, anything that belonged, that he was wearing at the time, or anything else he had with him, as well as any possible blood evidence that might remain after all these years. It's a very active scene. There are all kinds of crowds hanging around looking at this because this case was so big, so huge at the time. There are so many people who remember it very well who are still in this area. And what's the significance of this location? Well, we can tell you that it's literally about a half a block or so in either direction along the very same bus route that Etan was taking when he left his house that day to go to school, and the bus stop where he was heading. Bus stop in this direction, his house over in this direction.
Joining me live
Nancy?
on the scene, Susan Candiotti, CNN correspondent tonight. Is there a break in the search for 6-year-old Etan Patz? The little boy begs his mom that morning, please, please, let me walk the 2 blocks alone to catch the bus to school. She relents. He is never seen again. Etan Patz, one of the first faces ever seen on milk cartons in the desperate search to find the little boy. Right now to John Lieberman, investigative reporter, host of Crime Line. John, give me the facts. I know them very well, and the fact that Susan is standing in front of this building as they are digging underneath the streets for the skeletal remains of Etan Patz brings it back as if it were yesterday. What happened, John Lieberman?
Well, absolutely. And during my time at America's Most Wanted, tips would come in weekly on this case, and that's what happened here. Investigators since 2010 have been combing through new leads. One lead, which was a very good lead according to Bureau sources, led them to this basement, which we understand was abandoned at the time of the little boy's disappearance, but it was a known place where people would rendezvous for sex. So we understand also that this basement is linked to a carpenter who lived in that area and who also befriended this little boy all of those years ago. And his name has always surfaced in the investigation, and now they're taking a strong look at him as well. But this is really the first public show of progress in this case in years, and it's wonderful to see. And an FBI agent just emailed me and said, look, we're following up lots of leads, but we hope this is, quote, the big one.
You know, John Lieberman, I understand what you're saying, that this is wonderful, that there may finally be an answer. But, you know, it's so much easier for me and many others to think about Etan Patz, that he hasn't been found, maybe he's still alive somewhere, instead of being forced to think that his skeletal remains are under this building. Everyone just joining us right now, FBI and dozens of law enforcement, nearly 50, plus the FBI. Let's see the aerial shot, Liz, converging in a commercial area in the search for this 6-year-old little boy. There have been many, many theories about what happened to Etan Patz over the years. But right now, are all those theories set aside as jackhammers and shovels being used to dig deep under the surface of the street for little Etan Patz? And tonight, John Lieberman, we have to confront again what may have happened in this 6-year-old child's last moments of life. What are the theories, John?
Well, there are a million different theories: that he was abducted by a stranger, that he wandered off of the bus and was abducted by, perhaps somebody was supposed to pick him up when he got off the bus, somebody that he knew, that he went with. There was this theory that a convicted pedophile, a guy named Jose Ramos, who's in prison for an unrelated case, he was always the prime suspect, but he was never charged with this little boy's abduction. So you name it, there are theories for it. But again, sure, you want to hold out hope that somehow this little boy, this beautiful little boy, is going to come home. But we also have to be realistic, unfortunately, and in 2001, authorities did rule, that they do in fact believe that Etan is dead. But I'll tell you, the thing that, to me at least, is heartening is that this never became a cold case. This was always on people's minds, most of all in 2010 when the new DA reopened the case. But you can see this is anything but a cold case.
Well, what is so significant right now? Joining me is special guest, in addition to John Lieberman, the president of National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. My friend, our colleague, Ernie Allen, is with us. And what is so significant to me right now, Ernie, is not only finding Etan, but also one man that has continued to surface over and over and over, was later found guilty of multiple child molestations of young males similar to Etan Patz, is sitting in a Pennsylvania prison right now, and he is set to get out November 2012. All right, in just a couple of months. And I'm talking about Ramos, Ernie.
Absolutely, Nancy, and there have been some very committed people who have battled for a long time whenever Ramos comes up for parole to keep him in that Pennsylvania prison cell. And Etan's parents, Stanley and Julie Patz, have fought for a lot of years to get answers. They put pressure on authorities to keep this case alive. These people deserve justice. They deserve some answers. Hopefully this search will provide them.
With me right now, in addition to the president of the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, investigative reporter Rupa Mikulaneni. Rupa, even though they have ruled that they believe this boy is dead, I have always held out hope that someone abducted him because they wanted a child of their own. And when I have to look at pictures of Jose Ramos sitting, twiddling his thumbs in a penitentiary right now, waiting to get out in November, and I know about his connections to Etan Patz, and I think about this guy. Let me see his picture, Liz. Jose Ramos. Think about this guy alone in a room with your child. You want him out on the street? Because I don't. At this hour, Susan Candiotti standing by, jackhammers, shovels, picks, going beneath the surface of the street in the hopes that deep below a building basement we will find the remains of a 6-year-old little boy who, on the very first day he walks alone to the school stop, just 2 blocks, goes missing. Rupa, what happened, and what is the theory as to what happened during Etan's last moments?
Nancy, here's what we know. 33 years ago, just before Memorial Day weekend, we know that little Etan Patz was allowed for the first time to walk to the school bus for the first time alone without his parents or babysitter. And his parents agonized over this decision. Julie Patz, who I've spoken to, said that she agonized that day. She was worried. She had a feeling, but she allowed him to do it, Nancy, and he never made it to school that day. At 3:30 p.m. that afternoon, they learned he never made it to school, and that is when a frantic search began with bloodhounds, dogs, police, 100 police officers searching the SoHo area, and unfortunately not even a hair on little Etan Patz's head found. No evidence, no clues, until years later when we learned that this Jose Ramos and a couple of other men may have in fact been involved in his disappearance.
With me, Rupa Mikulaneni, the president of the National Center for Missing Exploited Children, John Lieberman, Glenn Shuck, Susan Candiotti, as we hope and wait. Is there a break in the search for 6-year-old Etan Patz tonight?
We're looking for human remains, clothing or other personal effects of Etan Patz in trying to find out where he disappeared, why he disappeared, and where.
I recall years ago when parents would leave baby carriages outside a bakery or a candy store just to run in for a moment to get something. You don't see that today.
1979. The last day of school before the Memorial Day weekend, and the 6-year-old gets his wish. A wish that will result in his disappearance. The first grader wants to walk to the bus stop alone. It's just a few blocks away, and all the other kids get to do it. Mom reluctantly agrees, kissing her son goodbye. The little boy's name is Etan Patz, and that was the last time anyone saw him. That afternoon, when the school bus arrives without Etan, his mother learns her son never made it to class. Police are called and a nationwide search begins.
I am just hearing in my ear that the medical examiner's van and employees have shown up on the scene. Everyone, for you just joining us. The long search for 6-year-old little boy Etan Patz may be coming to an end. Right now, you're seeing aerial footage of a desperate search for the little boy. That morning, he begged his mom to let him walk just 2 blocks to where he caught the bus to school. Just 2 blocks on his own. She relented. He was never seen again, and at this moment, nearly 50 law enforcement, F.B.I., they're converging at the basement of a building, jackhammering, picks, shovels, digging beneath the surface of the street in what they believe to be a search for the remains of the 6-year-old little boy. We are taking your calls. John Lieberman, it is very, very probative that the medical examiner's team has just arrived.
Well, absolutely. I mean, they're there for one reason, and that is to help determine whether, if they find anything, whether the findings are in fact human remains. And this operation could go on for a couple of days at least, because you have to remember there's drywall in this basement that wasn't there in 1979, so authorities have to remove it and then dig through the basement, dig through the brick walls. But we know that investigators went to the DA. They said they wanted a search warrant based on new information that they have, and that ended up in what you're seeing right now.
With me, reporter from Metro Networks, Glenn Shuck, is with us. As John Lieberman just pointed out, new information after all this time. What do you believe, Glenn Shuck, led the FBI to this particular location?
I still think, Nancy, it leads back to Jose Ramos, the information I'm getting. Now, just so your audience is aware, and John touched on it, as Susan did as well, this fellow, Ramos, he was a friend of the babysitter of Etan Patz's family. And I think the prime suspect reason for that is, again, that he was possibly aware of the fact that a young Etan Patz was going to be doing this first time on his own, possibly finding that out through the babysitter that he was friends with, the longtime babysitter for the Patz family. So I think the focus is still certainly on Jose Ramos. You've talked about him. He's in jail. But when they went to him initially, he admitted that he had seen Etan Patz the very day that he disappeared. This focus is still on him.
The fact that Ramos says he saw Etan Patz the day he disappears. Jose Ramos is a known and convicted child molester. And isn't it true, Out to you, Rupa Michelini. Didn't he have connections to a former babysitter of Etan's?
Yes, Nancy, that is absolutely correct. He was either dating or very close friendship with a former babysitter of Etan Patz. And not only that, Nancy, this man has been investigated and questioned even by the U.S. attorney who was heading up this case a number of years after Etan. It was a very determined man, Stuart Grebois, who reopened the case in 1982. And when Ramos was arrested for another crime against a child and sitting in jail, they had informants placed in that jail, and Ramos made some statements that would suggest that, in fact, he very much had something to do with the disappearance of Etan Patz that day.
So cops put rats, informants, in the jail specifically to catch Ramos, to try to extricate from him in casual conversation and long discussions in a tidbit about the 6-year-old missing boy. Is that what you're saying, Rupa?
That is what I'm saying, Nancy.
And isn't it true, Ernie Allen, this guy, Jose Ramos, when he was found under a bridge, that he had all these photos? Let me ask you this, Rupa. He had all these photos of little boys similar to Etan.
Yes, he did. They didn't find a picture of Etan, but they found pictures of little blonde boys with a bowl-cut haircut, just like Etan.
May 25th, 1979. Etan Patz. Etan's mother let the 6-year-old walk 2 blocks to catch the school bus on his own.
I recall years ago when parents would leave baby carriages outside a bakery or a candy store just to run in for a moment to get something.
She watched from the fire escape.
The Patz case represented the end of innocence.
But Etan vanished in those 2 blocks.
You had to be very careful around this neighborhood then. After that,
No body, no admissions, no witnesses.
You know, a lot of moms like me don't even leave their children in the minivan for 45 seconds because of what happened to Etan Patz. Imagine what this mother and father have been through. The mom lets the little boy walk to the bus stop for the very first time. He begs and begs. It's just 2 blocks. She relents. He is never seen again. At this hour, FBI, nearly 50 law enforcement, including the medical examiner's van, they're on the scene converging, jackhammering, digging, shovels, picks, in an effort to find, based on a new tip, the remains of the 6-year-old little boy, Etan Patz, one of the first faces we ever saw on a milk carton, begging for help. We are taking your calls. Back to you, Rupa Michelini. You have written about this. You have studied this story inside and out. Why did the mom relent that day? What happened?
Nancy, Etan had been asking for some time. His other school friends were allowed to walk to the bus stop. It was only 2 blocks, and this had been in discussion for a while. So finally she relented. We'll never know why that particular day she said yes, but she did. And here we are now, 33 years later, this little boy vanished.
And this was an upscale area. Kat McCullough also on the story. It was, as I recall, the Friday before Memorial Day. Everyone was looking forward to a great long weekend. And it wasn't until Mom calls the school at 3:30 in the afternoon when Etan didn't show up, she realized something was wrong. Right, Kat?
That's correct, Nancy. The mother didn't realize he had not made it to the bus stop until he didn't return home after school. This is a very safe, upscale area.
Let me see the live shot aerial view. Everyone, there you see police, FBI, medical examiners converging as they jackhammer through the bottom of the basement floor beneath the streets in the search for human remains of a 6-year-old boy. The mystery that has hung around the parent's neck ever since he disappeared that May morning.
Hard at work down there. You've got the FBI, a team of about 40 people, and I'm told there was a search warrant, obviously, that they had to get before they went in there. And they did tell the parents ahead of time that they were going to be doing this, and they hope that this is what it will take to solve this case. Nancy?
You know, Susan Candiotti, how close is the digging to where the parents lived with Etan?
I'm sorry, we had a little technical problem there and I couldn't quite make it out. One more time?
Sure. Susan Candiotti, everybody, is live on the scene with me. She's in the middle of traffic. There's jackhammering going on deep below the surface there in the basement. Susan, how close is this spot to where Etan lived with his parents?
Good question. It's very close. They live maybe about a half a block down in this direction, and it was about the same distance to the bus stop where he was heading that morning. As you've said, Nancy, this was the first time he had begged his parents, please let me walk by myself, and he did. So they don't know, investigators are telling me, whether someone grabbed him along the way, possibly might have grabbed him and took him into this space. Again, there was some kind of business there on the ground floor at the time. No one on scene here in authority is able to tell me exactly what it was. Right now, there is a business on that ground floor there, a clothing store. So they think the theory is, by looking at going over all the evidence they had at the time, that there might be a connection here. They looked at the building at the time, but they won't tell us to what extent they did. So the FBI has said, let's look again, and they're hard at work down there digging to see whether they can find anything.
Susan Candiotti, CNN correspondent, live on the scene. Don't move a hair, Susan Candiotti. Bethany Marshall, psychoanalyst and author. Bethany, I never even had the fortitude to go back to the scene where my fiancé was murdered. I hope I never see it as long as I live. I don't even want to think about it. And when I think about Etan's parents, imagining that they have walked back and forth in front of his dead body, their 6-year-old baby boy, 1,000,000 times, what is this going to do to them, Bethany?
Nancy, this is going to re-traumatize them. And not only that, to know that their own babysitter was being groomed by a pedophile. Furthermore, they are now tortured by all the information that's come out. And what we know through research is that children are at the greatest risk for child homicide and abduction right outside their parents' front door. 1/4 of all children who are abducted are found within blocks of the family home. And we know that pedophiles gravitate towards bus stops. The last place you want your child to walk alone is to a bus stop. Almost every school bus stop in the United States likely has a pedophile lurking around it, and this tortures the parents too.
To Pat Brown, criminal profiler, author of Only the Truth. Weigh in, Pat.
I think they're all over Ramos, absolutely, because he, first of all, he's a convicted pedophile. Secondly, he was connected to the family. He's a handyman, a popular job for pedophiles. And the fact is, they wouldn't be tearing this place up if they didn't have a good tip and believe they could get DNA linking to Ramos. They think they're going to have the DNA match.
And can you imagine Jose Ramos sitting behind bars in the pen right now, set to get out in November? No way, Ramos. Eleanor Odom, Joey Jackson, Holly Hughes. Eleanor Odom, it's perfectly okay to put informants behind bars to catch someone like Ramos talking about Etan Patz's death. Yes, no?
Oh, yes, Nancy, and that's a good way to get some good information because there's no privilege there. They can talk all they want to those confidential informants. So great idea on the prosecution and law enforcement's part.
On the other hand, Joey Jackson joining us out of New York, the reality is that Ramos could shoot off his mouth about some BS about Etan Patz just to get a deal.
He really could, and there's a credibility question there. And the reason he hasn't been, I mean, there's a civil finding against him. That was in 2004. The family was given $2 million. They never collected a thing. But the problem has been there's been no physical evidence. There's been no admissions that he's made, and there's been no eyewitnesses. And so it's been tough to connect them. But every suspicion does lead to him, Nancy.
And Holly Hughes, you were a former prosecutor, now now defense attorney between me and you and Ella and Joey. We've handled plenty of rats, but now Ramos is set to walk in November. If he is connected to this case, he has nothing to gain by talking now.
Absolutely correct. And, you know, Joey Jackson nailed it. It's a credibility issue, not just Ramos's credibility, but any informant, any rat that the police put in there. If, in fact, charges are levied, the state's going to have to call that guy as a witness, and he's going to be destroyed on his cross-examination.
Well, I've called plenty of rats when I had to, so just don't say to use destroyed yet. To Dr. Bill Lloyd, board-certified surgeon pathologist. Dr. Lloyd, if the remains are found, what do you expect we can learn from them? And what condition will they be in?
It depends if the remains were placed in an open space, buried in soil, or buried in concrete. Concrete is a very chemically active substance, and remains buried in concrete are often difficult to work with. But if in soil or left in an open space, they will be able to extract DNA, confirm identity. You know, a young child, age 6 or 7, is gaining teeth and losing teeth, so it'll be an easy matter there also to confirm the presence of Etan Patz.
We are taking your calls very quickly. Back to Susan Candiotti. Hold on. I've got C.W. Jensen, retired Portland police captain, in my ear. C.W., I want to hear your thoughts.
Nancy, I think it might make your viewers more comfortable to know that if the police get a search warrant, that isn't just a rubber stamp. They've got to go in with a document that lists over and over and over why they believe that they need to search this place for this child's remains. And so if they're probably there, then that means that maybe if they find the remains, that's all they need then to get a complete case against Ramos.
Back to Susan Candiotti, CNN correspondent, joining us there on the scene. She's one of the first reporters there. Susan, I'm hearing through other sources trying to confirm that there's a drywall in the basement that was not there when Etan Patz went missing. Authorities planning to blast through the drywall and start digging down. Can you hear me now?
I missed the first part of your question. Now I can, yes.
Okay, Susan, I understand I understand there's a drywall there in that basement, deep below the street surface, that was not there when Etan went missing, and they are bringing down the wall and digging. What are you hearing there on the ground?
Well, we're hearing that, yes, the place has been renovated over the years, so they are figuring they're probably going to have to go through layers. So, yes, now there are cinder block walls there. The basement is concrete. They've got jackhammers down there. And if you look over my shoulder again, it's this red brick building. It's the basement area that we're talking about. They've got to dig deep. And you see there's a crime scene unit there, that white van. And I hope you can also make out the blue tent. They've got that covering the entrance to the building that leads down to the basement. The door leads down to the basement. Because when they start bringing things out, if they bring out any critical evidence, they don't want anyone to see what they're working on, so they have that area protected until they can get it out of there. And yes, they have a search warrant, and yes, we're trying to get our hands on it for more details. All we know is that the building had been looked at before. They're going back again. Obviously, they have some additional information they said they want to look at that leads them to believe that either he was killed there or that his remains may have been disposed of there, Nancy.
I can't tell you how many thousands of people, Susan Candiotti, are standing by to see if they bring up a future flight captain pilot hat. Blue corduroy jacket, blue pants, blue sneakers with fluorescent stripes, a blue cloth bag with elephants imprinted on it. What little 6-year-old Etan was wearing the day he went missing, just 3 feet, 50 pounds. Let me see if I can get, I think I've got Susan back. Susan, you referred to that blue tent that will cover up anything that they bring out from the excavation. Susan, what can you tell me about a cadaver dog hiding down there in that basement?
Nancy, if they bring out anything, they'll want to, of course, protect it, handle it well so that it is not contaminated in any way, and they want to keep that from public view. So they're going to, when they bring out anything, they'll first keep it under the cover of that blue tent. This is if they're lucky, if they are fortunate to find anything during that search. So they're keeping it from public view at this time. We can't hear the jackhammers at this distance, but I know that they're using them right now to dig through that cement floor. We're not sure whether that's been worked over or renovated over the years, but certainly we know that the basement is vacant and has been vacant for quite some time. But there was a business there many years ago, we are told. No one seems to know who's on the scene right now connected to the case, what it was. Nancy?
Rupa Mikulaneni, I'm hearing that a carpenter or a handyman who worked in that basement befriended Etan, hence why we are there.
Right, Nancy, and this is where it gets a bit confusing because Jose Ramos was also a handyman at some point, and he had various jobs in the area and the neighborhood. And now, Nancy, that's another detail.
Everyone, quick break. I want to remind you of to Metro Networks reporter Glenn Shuck. Federal sources are saying that the boy had been in that basement the night before he disappears, and that very quickly after he goes missing, they suddenly resurface the basement floor. What are you hearing, Glenn Shuck?
That's exactly what we heard, and this is why the district attorney, Cy Vance, when he took office in 2010, said he wanted to take an immediate look at this case again. They got that information about the so-called sudden flooring that went in there. It's a very thick concrete floor. No coincidence, certainly, Nancy, that was done, and that's a major reason why Cy Vance said, we got to get back in. We've got to take a look at this case, and indeed, they're there big time, big numbers there today.
Eleanor Odom, Joey Jackson, Holly Hughes, did they actually think justice was asleep, Eleanor Odom, that we would just give up on Etan Patz?
No, Nancy, you know what we might have now that we didn't have 33 years ago, and that is forensic evidence, that blood evidence, that DNA evidence, things that we can find out now.
We will stay on the story in the hopes that the remains of Etan Patz will be discovered. Let's stop and remember Army Major.